There is a giant earthen octagon sitting in the middle of Newark, Ohio. Its earthen walls run for thousands of feet, joined to a perfect circle of packed soil, the whole figure wide enough to swallow several modern football stadiums laid end to end. From the ground, it looks like a series of long grassy ridges, gentle slopes you could walk over without thinking twice. From the air, it snaps into focus. 8 straight walls, 8 open gateways, one enormous ring. Someone surveyed this shape into the Ohio floodplain around 2,000 years ago, long before any wheel or metal tool reached this continent. And here's the part that should stop you cold. They did not build it to point at a mountain or a river or a city. They built it to catch the moon. And when modern astronomers finally checked the math, the builders turned out to be right, almost to the degree. Welcome back to Bedrock. This is the channel where we dig under the grass of North America and find the engineering that the textbooks skipped. I am going to do 3 things in this video. First, I will introduce you to the Hopewell, a culture far older and stranger than the mound builders almost everyone has heard of. Second, I will walk you through the staggering scale of what they raised out of bare dirt. And third, I will show you exactly how a society with no written language and no telescope managed to encode the single most difficult cycle in the night sky into a shape you can still stand inside today. Start with who these people were, because almost everyone gets this wrong. When you hear the phrase, ancient mound builders, you probably picture Cahokia, the great city near modern St. Louis, with its enormous, flat-topped pyramid of earth. That world belonged to the Mississippian culture, and it rose much later, mostly after the year 1000. The Hopewell came centuries before that. They flourished across the Ohio River Valley, roughly between 100 years before the Common Era and 500 years into it. So when Cahokia was still empty floodplain, the Hopewell were already finished. These were not the same people, not the same era, and not the same way of life. The Mississippians built cities. The Hopewell did something harder to explain. They built geometry. Across southern Ohio, they laid out rings, squares, and octagons in raw soil, many of them sharing the exact same dimensions even when they sat days of walking apart. They were not farmers crowded behind walls. They were scattered groups who gathered at these enormous ceremonial grounds, traded goods that traveled from the Rocky Mountains and the Gulf of Mexico, and then carried surveying knowledge precise enough that 2 distant sites could be twins. Their world ran on copper sheets from the Great Lakes, shark teeth from the southern coasts, and a glassy black stone called obsidian, carried east from the Rockies, all of it pooling at these earthworks. Hold that contrast in your head. A loose, mobile people, and yet a shared mathematics carved into the land. Now the scale, because words like enclosure do not prepare you for it. The Newark complex once sprawled across roughly 4 square miles of geometric earthworks, the largest set of connected geometric earthworks ever built anywhere on Earth. 2 pieces of it survive intact. The first is the Great Circle, a ring of earthen embankment about 1,200 feet across, with walls that still rise well over your head and a moat dug along the inside. To picture 1,200 feet, line up 4 American football fields end to end and you are still short of crossing it. The embankment climbs to roughly 8 feet in places, and along the entrance it swells higher still, so that a person standing in the bottom of the inner ditch would see nothing but a wall of grass and sky. Walk into its center, and the modern town disappears behind the grassy rampart. The second surviving piece is the octagon earthworks, and this is the one that matters most for our story. Picture 8 long walls, forming an 8-sided figure, each side stretching roughly 550 feet, every corner left open as a gateway, and the whole octagon tied by a set of parallel embankments to a large circular enclosure beside it. The octagon alone wraps around 50 acres of ground. The footprint is vast. To stake out a true octagon at that size, with corners that close cleanly, and walls that stay straight across the uneven floodplain, you need a working command of geometry and a method of surveying long distances, by eye and by sightline. They had it. The angles are consistent, The diameter of the circle attached to the octagon matches the side lengths of the Great Square at another Hopewell site miles away, the same unit of measure repeated like a signature. The figures repeat across sites, and the comparison that ends up in every headline holds up where it counts. Set this beside Stonehenge, the famous stone ring in England, and Stonehenge is tiny. The outer ditch at Stonehenge spans barely 360 feet. The entire Stonehenge monument would fit inside one corner of the octagon with room to spare. Bigger than Stonehenge is not hype here. It is a measurement, so picture standing inside that octagon, and let the obvious question land. Why this shape? A circle you can understand. A circle is the simplest thing to lay out with a rope and a stake. A square makes sense for ceremony, but an octagon joined to a circle, sized to swallow a city block, pointing at nothing you can see on the horizon. No mountain marks the gateways. No river follows the walls. For a long time, that was the puzzle that nagged at everyone who studied the place. The Hopewell clearly did nothing here by accident. The precision rules out a careless guess. Possible. Yet, the orientation of the whole figure seemed to ignore every landmark on the ground. It was as if the builders had aligned the octagon to something that was not there, something you could not point to in daylight. Researchers measured the walls, mapped the gateways, checked them against the sun, and the sun did not fit. The summer solstice did not line up. The winter solstice did not line up. Whatever this octagon was built to track, it was not the easy target in the sky. And that is the clue that cracks the case wide open, because there is exactly one thing up there that is famously, brutally hard to follow. That thing is the moon, and not the moon you think you know. We all watch the moon grow and shrink over a month. That part is easy. The hard cycle is something else entirely. The point on the horizon where the moon rises does not stay put the way the sun roughly does across a year. It drifts north and south over the weeks, a much faster swing than the sun makes. But layered on top of that monthly drift is a second, slower wobble. The full width of the moon's rising range itself breathes in and out over a span of about 18.6 years. Think of the sun as a metronome ticking the same path every year. The moon is a metronome whose arms slowly widen and narrow over almost 2 decades. At one extreme of that long cycle, the moon rises and sets at its most spread out points on the horizon, swinging farther north and farther south than the sun ever does, a position astronomers call a major lunar standstill. Then, over the next 9 years or so, the range pulls back in toward a minimum, and over the 9 after that, it spreads out again. 18.6 years for one complete swing. Sit with how hard that is to even notice. A single human lifetime back then might cover 3 or 4 of these cycles total. You cannot see it in a night, a season, or a year, because the change from one month to the next is buried inside the much louder monthly drift. You can only find it by watching the exact rising point of the moon against fixed marks on the horizon, generation after generation, recording where it touches the ridgeline, and comparing notes across decades. No telescope, no written tables, just patient eyes, and a memory that had to outlive the watchers. Most cultures never untangled it at all. To track the 18.6-year cycle, you first have to suspect it is even there. If a forgotten people quietly solving the hardest puzzle in the sky is the kind of story you want more of, this is the channel for it. So, stay with me and subscribe, because the payoff is the part that turns suspicion into proof. In the early 1980s, 2 professors from Earlham College, an astronomer named Ray Hively, and a philosopher named Robert Horne, came to Newark expecting to find nothing special. They set out to test the alignment claims and quietly debunk them. They surveyed the embankments with care, plotting the precise compass bearing of every wall and gateway, then projecting those sightlines out to the horizon to see what rose and set along them. Instead of disproving anything, the measurements would not let them go. When they checked the octagon against the moon rather than the sun, the figure lit up. The main symmetry axis of the whole circle-octagon combination, the line running straight down the center, pointed almost exactly at the rising point of the moon at its northernmost standstill. the far edge of that 18.6-year swing. That was not the only hit. They found that the walls and the open gateways marked the other key rise and set points of the moon across the full cycle as well. 4 of the 8 walls aligned to extreme positions of the moon, the northern and southern limits of both its rising and its setting. The structure was not pointing at one moment. It was a map of the entire 18-year wandering of the moon, frozen into earthen embankments. Stand in the right gateway, on the right night, near a standstill, and the moon climbs out of the earth, exactly where the wall aims. The thing that nagged everyone, the shape that ignored every landmark on the ground, ignored the ground because it was looking up. And the precision is the part that turns a curiosity into proof. These alignments were not loose, not a vague nod toward the right quarter of the sky. The standstill axis matches to within a fraction of a degree, far tighter than coincidence allows when you account for how many ways a random shape could have been oriented across the floodplain. Think about what that requires. The full lunar cycle takes longer than most marriages last. To build a structure this size aligned to it, the Hopewell had to track the moon for decades before the first basket of soil was ever carried. Agree across generations on where the extreme points fell, and then survey those sightlines into a 4-square-mile figure on uneven ground, all without writing a single number down. They were running an astronomical observatory and an instrument of prediction at the same time, encoded in dirt. Knowing where the moon would stand let them count time itself, marking the great rhythm of the sky for ceremonies that may have arrived only once in a generation. For a long time, the academic world was cautious about claims like this, wary of reading modern wishful thinking into ancient sites, scarred by older theories that saw alignments everywhere. That caution is exactly why the verdict matters now. In 2023, the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks, a group of 8 Ohio sites that includes the Newark Earthworks, the Hopewell Mound Group, Mound City, and Fort Ancient, were inscribed as a World Heritage Site by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. The citation singled out their scale, their geometric precision, and their astronomical alignments. This is no longer a fringe theory whispered by enthusiasts. It is recognized by the same body that protects the pyramids of Giza and the temples of ancient Greece. So reframe the whole picture, because the old story is dead. The lazy version of North American history paints the people here before Europeans as small bands wandering the woods, piling up dirt for reasons no one quite remembers. Look at the octagon, and that story collapses. To do what the Hopewell did, you need surveyors who could lay out an 8-sided figure across rough terrain and keep the angles true. You need astronomers patient enough to follow a cycle no single one of them would see complete more than a handful of times. You need a way to pass exact knowledge across generations with no alphabet, no number system written on a page, nothing but trained observation and disciplined memory. The geometry proves the intent. The lunar match proves the science. These were engineers and astronomers working in soil instead of stone. 2,000 years ago, on this continent, while the rest of the world, that gets all the credit, was doing comparable work and getting written into every textbook for it. The Hopewell left no carved tablets to brag with. They left the moon itself, mapped into the ground. Here is the detail that haunts me, though. For most of the last century, this masterpiece of ancient astronomy sat under a private golf course. The land around the Octagon Earthworks was leased out and turned into the grounds of the Mound Builders Country Club. Fairways and putting greens laid right over the ancient walls. For decades, the public could barely set foot on one of the most important astronomical monuments on the continent. The moon kept rising over its northern standstill on schedule, exactly as the builders predicted, while golf carts rolled across the alignment below and putters tapped balls over a 2,000-year-old observatory. After a long legal fight, the Ohio History Connection finally won the property back through the courts, with a settlement reached in 2024 and full public access opening on the first day of 2025. 2,000 years of patient skywatching, nearly lost under a sand trap, handed back to the people who should have had it all along. Which leaves the question I cannot shake, and I want your answer in the comments. We can explain how a culture with writing might track an 18.6-year cycle. You write the numbers down and hand the page to the next generation. The Hopewell had no page. So, how did they do it? How do you measure something that takes almost 2 decades to complete, with no written record, and still nail the alignment to a fraction of a degree? Then, carry that knowledge accurately enough to build it into the earth. My thesis is simple. These were not primitive people who got lucky with a shape. They were a sophisticated scientific tradition we badly underestimated, and the octagon is their proof on the ground. If you think there is another explanation, a simpler one, drop it below and let us argue it out. And if a giant lunar calculator built out of dirt 2,000 years ago is the kind of forgotten engineering you want more of, subscribe and stay with Bedrock, because the ground under North America is hiding a lot more than anyone told you in school.